7 women have disappeared from Thornridge in the past 10 years. No one looked for them. I am the 8th. Blood dripped from Eleanor Winter's gloved hand, falling in perfect crimson circles against the virgin snow. Behind her, the baying of hounds echoed through the pines, their voices carried on a wind so cold it burned the lungs. Somewhere a man was calling her name, that same voice that had once whispered promises of protection, of a life better than the one she'd left behind. That voice now carried only rage, only possession. "Nell, you can't hide from what belongs to me." She clutched the silver ring tighter in her palm, its edges biting into flesh already raw from the climb. The mountains loomed above snow-laden sentinels, watching her desperate flight with ancient, indifferent eyes. Just a little farther, just a little higher. Somewhere up there, if the stories were true, if the scrawled map wasn't another cruel joke, waited the keeper of the highlands. Her breath escaped in ragged plumes as she pushed forward. The world narrowed to the space between heartbeats, between footfalls. One more step, always one more, until there were no more steps to take. The ground fell away beneath her, and Nell tumbled into darkness. 6 months earlier, Thornridge stood like a crooked stitch on the mountainside of Farrington, a town sewn together from ambition and compromise. The mines had brought men searching for silver and gold. The men had brought their desires and their fears. What remained after 30 years was this: a main street of false-fronted buildings, a church with a bell that rang too rarely, and the grand houses on the hill where the men who owned the mines lived above the men who died in them. The finest of these houses belonged to Clayton Winters, and from its third-floor window, Nell watched snow blanket the town in silence. Winter had arrived early this year, the first snow falling before the last autumn leaves had surrendered. 6 winters she had witnessed from this window. 6 winters trapped in this marriage. "Eleanor, where are you hiding, woman?" Clay's voice carried up the stairs, edged with whiskey and impatience. Nell's fingers tightened on the windowsill. There was a time when that voice had seemed kind, when Clay Winters had appeared at the field hospital where she nursed the broken boys of the Union Army. A successful businessman from Montana Territory, he'd said. Looking for a wife to share his prosperity, he'd said. He hadn't mentioned his temper, or his fists. Eleanor, she smoothed her skirts and straightened her spine, schooling her features into placid submission, a mask she'd perfected. The bruise along her rib cage throbbed with each careful step down the stairs. Clay waited in the parlor, whiskey glass in hand, his brother Thomas lounging nearby. Where Clay was all hard angles and broad shoulders, Thomas was slender, with a face some called handsome, if you didn't look too closely at his eyes. Cold eyes, calculating eyes. "There you are," Clay said, as if she'd been deliberately avoiding him, rather than simply existing in another part of their cavernous house. "We're having the Masons for dinner tonight. See that cook prepare something impressive." "Of course," Nell said, her voice soft, always soft. Loud voices provoked him. Questions provoked him. Existing in a way he found inconvenient provoked him. "And wear the blue dress," he added, "the one that hides your thinness." Thomas smiled behind his own whiskey glass. "The judge appreciates a woman with some substance, doesn't he, brother?" Clay nodded. "Not like that wife of his. Sickly thing." "Such a shame about her consumption," Thomas said, though his tone carried no sympathy. "Second wife to fall ill that way, isn't it?" Something in Thomas's words sent a chill through Nell that had nothing to do with the winter air seeping through the windows. There was a message beneath the words, a secret passing between the brothers that excluded her. "Eleanor will be wearing the blue," Clay said, his tone brooking no disagreement. "And she'll be pleasant company tonight, won't you, my dear?" It wasn't a question. It was never a question. "Yes, Clay," she answered, the mask firmly in place. Later, as she instructed the cook about dinner, Nell caught sight of her reflection in the kitchen window. A ghost stared back, pale, thin, despite Clay's complaints, with eyes that had seen too much. First the horrors of war, boys younger than her brother dying under her hands. Then the slow death of her own spirit in this gilded cage. "Mrs. Winters." Mary the Howe, young kitchen maid, stood nearby, concern etched on her round face. "Yes, Mary." "Are you well, ma'am? You look haunted." Nell forced a smile. "Just tired. The change in weather, perhaps." Mary nodded, though her eyes held doubt. "Mrs. Yates was asking after you. Said she ain't seen you at the Women's Auxiliary in weeks." "I've been indisposed." Mary's gaze flickered briefly to Nell's collar, high and starched to hide the yellowing bruise beneath. She didn't comment. No one ever did. She also mentioned Mrs. Cooper ain't been seen lately. That's the third woman from town to just up and vanish this year. Folk are starting to talk. Nell stiffened. What do you mean vanish? Mary leaned closer, voice dropping. Her husband says she ran off with a traveling salesman. But Mrs. Yates says she saw Mr. Cooper the night before dragging Mrs. Cooper up the back stairs by her hair. Next morning, he's telling everyone she's gone and him with scratches down his face he claims came from a barn cat. Something cold settled in Nell's stomach. And no one's looking for her. Mary shrugged. Sheriff says it's a domestic matter, not his business if a wife runs off. Besides, she added, glancing toward the parlor where Clay's voice still rumbled, who'd crossed the Winters family or their friends? Cooper works your husband's mine. Sheriff gets his pay from the town council. And who runs the council? The same men who run everything else, Nell whispered. Mary nodded grimly. Best get ready for your dinner, ma'am. They don't like to be kept waiting. Judge Nathaniel Mason and his wife arrived precisely at 7, snow dusting their fine wool coats. The judge was a bear of a man, barrel-chested with a silver beard and eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Mason was his opposite, bird-like, fragile, with a persistent cough she tried to hide behind an embroidered handkerchief. Eleanor, my dear, the judge boomed, pressing a dry kiss to her cheek. Lovelier each time I see you. His eyes lingered a moment too long on the neckline of her blue dress. Nell resisted the urge to cross her arms. Judge Mason, Mrs. Mason, welcome to our home. Mrs. Mason Nell realized with the start that she didn't know the woman's first name, despite years of these dinners, smiled weakly. Thank you for having us, Mrs. Winters. There was something in Mrs. Mason's eyes that spoke to Nell across the room, a shared knowledge, a shared fear. Dinner proceeded with excruciating slowness. The men dominated the conversation, mining prospects, town politics, complaints about the foreign element among the miners. Nell and Mrs. Mason ate little, spoke less, existing as decorative afterthoughts at their own table. I heard there was some trouble at the North Shaft yesterday, the judge mentioned, cutting into his steak. One of the men getting above himself. Clay's expression darkened. Santiago, Mexican fellow, been filling the others' heads with nonsense about unsafe conditions. After we've been so generous letting their kind work our minds at all, Thomas added. I had Foreman Collins make an example of him. Clay continued, 10 lashes in front of the others. He won't be spreading dissent again. Good, good, the judge nodded. Firm hand, that's what's needed. Mrs. Mason's fork clattered against her plate. Excuse me, she murmured, pressing her handkerchief to her lips. A touch of dizziness. Always something with you, isn't it, Margaret? The judge said, his jovial tone carrying an undercurrent of warning. Perhaps Eleanor can show you to a sitting room to recover. Nell stood immediately. Of course, please come with me, Mrs. Mason. In the small parlor off the main dining room, Margaret Mason sank onto a settee, her breathing labored. Can I get you something? Nell asked. Water, brandy. No. Margaret caught Nell's wrist with surprising strength. Listen to me, we don't have much time before they come looking. Her voice was urgent, all pretense of frailty gone. You need to be careful. You need to watch for the signs. Signs what signs? When a man like Clayton Winters or my husband grows tired of a wife, she doesn't just disappear. First come the increased accusations, then the public humiliations. Then they start speaking of your nervous condition or your consumption. By then it's almost too late. Nell's blood ran cold. Mrs. Mason, Margaret, what are you saying? I'm saying Rebecca wasn't Clay's first wife. There was another before her. Both died of fever. Both were buried in closed caskets. Margaret's eyes burned with desperate intensity. I'm saying I'm the judge's third wife. The first two succumbed to consumption. And I'm saying there's a pattern in this town that goes beyond my husband and yours. Why are you telling me this? Because I've seen how he looks at you lately. How they all look at you. The same way they started looking at me 6 months ago. She pressed something into Nell's palm. If the time comes, look for the white lily. Follow the moonlight road. Before Nell could ask what she meant, the door opened. Thomas stood there, his smile not reaching his eyes. Ladies, you're missing dessert, The judge's growing concern for his wife's delicate health. The way he said it like a threat barely concealed sent shivers down Nell's spine. Margaret's hands slipped from Nell's as she rose her mask of fragility firmly back in place. "Coming, Mr. Winters. Just a touch of breathlessness. Mrs. Winters has been most kind." As they returned to the dining room, Nell discreetly examined what Margaret had pressed into her hand, a small, smooth stone with a lily crudely carved into its surface. 3 days later, Santiago's wife came to the back door of the Winters house, her face bruised, her eyes wild with fear. "Please," she begged in broken English. "My husband. They say he tried to run. They shoot him in leg. Now infection. He die without help." Nell glanced over her shoulder. Clay was at the mine. Thomas had ridden to the next town on business. No one would know if she helped. "Wait here," she whispered. She gathered supplies from her personal medicine chest, cleaned rags, carbolic acid, laudanum for the pain, quinine for the fever. These were her secrets, remnants of the nurse she had once been, the woman who had purpose beyond being Clay Winter's wife. "Take these," she told Mrs. Santiago. "Clean the wound with the acid. Give him the laudanum for pain, but not too much. The quinine if fever comes." "God bless you, Senora." Mrs. Santiago clutched the bundle. "They say you are angel." "Who says that?" "The women. We know which houses are safe, which women help. We have signs." She touched her shawl and Nell noticed a small white flower embroidered on the corner, a white lily, like the carving Margaret had given her. "Go quickly," Nell urged, "and don't tell anyone I helped you." But someone had seen. Mary, the kitchen maid, watched from the doorway, her young face solemn. "It's dangerous what you're doing, ma'am," she said after Mrs. Santiago had gone. "If Mr. Winters found out, then he won't find out," Nell replied with more courage than she felt. Mary hesitated, then lowered her voice. "There's talk among the mining families about a man up in the high country. They say he helps women who need to disappear." "What man?" "They call him the Keeper of the Highlands. Some say he was a preacher once. Others say he's the bastard son of one of the mine owners. All agree he's built some kind of sanctuary up there. But the path is dangerous. Few find it on their own." The Keeper of the Highlands, the White Lily. The moonlight road, pieces of a puzzle Nell couldn't yet assemble. "Why are you telling me this, Mary?" The girl's eyes welled with tears. "Because Mrs. Cooper was my aunt, and she didn't run off with no salesman." Clay discovered the missing medical supplies that evening. "Explain this," he demanded, holding up her medicine chest, its contents in disarray. "Who have you been playing nurse to?" Nell's heart hammered against her ribs. I sometimes get headaches. The laudanum helps." "Don't lie to me, Eleanor." His voice was deadly quiet. "Thomas saw that Mexican woman leaving our house today, the wife of the troublemaker." "Thomas. Of course. Always watching, always reporting." "She was looking for work," Nell attempted. "Was Santiago injured?" The blow came without warning, the back of Clay's hand connecting with her cheek with enough force to send her staggering against the bedroom wall. "I won't be made a fool of in my own house," he roared. "First that nonsense at church questioning Reverend Porter about charity for the mining families, and now this undermining my authority with the workers." Another blow, then another. Nell tasted blood. "You embarrass me," he hissed, grabbing her throat. "Make me look weak, like I can't control my own wife." Black spots danced at the edges of her vision as his grip tightened. "Clay," she gasped, "please." Something in her pleading tone reached him. He released her, and she collapsed to the floor, drawing desperate breaths. "You're confined to the house," he declared. "No more charity work, no more church socials, no more visitors. If you can't behave appropriately in public, you won't appear in public at all." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "And Eleanor, if I discover you've been helping the miners or their families again, you'll wish I'd squeezed harder." For 2 weeks, Nell lived as a prisoner in her own home. Mary brought news when she could. Santiago had survived thanks to Nell's medicines. Mrs. Mason's cough had worsened, and the judge had sent for a specialist from Helena. Thomas watched Nell, constantly reporting her every movement to Clay. Then came the night of the storm. Snow fell in sheets, wind howling around the eaves of the house. Clay and Thomas had gone to an emergency meeting of the town council, something about damage to the mine entrance from the blizzard. Nell sat by her bedroom window, watching the town disappear beneath nature's fury. A movement in the swirling snow caught her eye, a figure struggling up the path to the house. As it drew closer, Nell recognized Mrs. Santiago clutching something to her chest, her thin shawl offering little protection against the storm. Without thinking, Nell rushed downstairs and opened the back door. "Mrs. Santiago, come in quickly." The woman stumbled inside, snow melting from her clothes onto the kitchen floor. Her face was battered worse than before, one eye swollen shut. "Senora Winters," she gasped. "They kill him. My Santiago. Say he tried to escape again. But he too weak to walk. They murder him and throw him in abandoned shaft." Horror washed over Nell. Who did this?" "Your husband's men, the foreman Collins, and the other one with snake eyes." "Thomas. It had to be. And now they come for me," Mrs. Santiago continued. "Say I help him try escape. I have nowhere to go, but the women say you know of the mountain man, the one who helps." Nell shook her head. I've only heard rumors. Please, Senora, they will kill me too." Nell made a decision that would change everything. "Wait here, warm yourself by the stove. I'll get you proper clothes food." She hurried to gather supplies, her warmest cloak, boots, bread and cheese wrapped in cloth, the last of her medicine. As she passed Clay's study, a thought struck her. The men kept maps of the mountains for hunting expeditions. Perhaps one might show the way to this keeper. The study door was unlocked, a rare oversight. Nell slipped inside and began searching through the drawers of Clay's massive oak desk. Maps, ledgers, contracts. Nothing useful until she reached the bottom drawer, locked, but with the key still in place. Inside lay a small wooden box, intricately carved. Nell's hands trembled as she opened it. A silver ring lay nestled on velvet, too small for a man's hand. Engraved inside, Rebecca, beloved wife. Rebecca, Clay's first wife. The one who supposedly died of fever 5 years before he met Nell. Beneath the ring lay a folded paper. Nell opened it to find a map different from the hunting charts. This one showed a trail leading high into the mountains, marked with a series of symbols Nell didn't recognize. In the margin, a message written in a delicate hand: "Find the lighthouse on the mountain. He will help those like us." And below that, like a desperate afterthought, "If you find this, I am already gone. May you fare better. R." Nell's blood turned to ice. Rebecca hadn't died. She had tried to escape, and left this map for whoever came after her. The sound of the front door opening jolted Nell from her discovery. Voices in the hallway. Clay and Thomas returned early. "Damned waste of time," Clay was saying. "The mine can wait until the storm passes." "At least we caught that Santiago woman on our way," Thomas replied. "Trying to flee in the blizzard, if you can believe it. Collins is taking care of her now." Nell froze. Mrs. Santiago. They'd found her before she could reach the Winters house. Which meant she shoved the map and ring into her pocket and rushed back to the kitchen. Empty. No sign of Mrs. Santiago. Only wet footprints leading to the back door, now standing open against the storm. "Eleanor," Clay's voice called from the front of the house. "Where are you, woman?" She'd been gone too long. They would know she'd been in the study. In that moment, Nell made her second life-changing decision of the night. She grabbed her bundled supplies, threw on her heaviest coat, and slipped out the back door into the raging blizzard. Behind her, she heard Clay's roar of discovery. Ahead lay only swirling white and the promise of either freedom or death. Both perhaps were better than the life she was leaving behind. The storm swallowed her whole as she pushed forward into the unknown, Rebecca's map clutched in her frozen fingers, guiding her toward a lighthouse she couldn't yet see. Pain returned first. Then cold, a bone-deep, merciless cold that made Nell wonder if this was death. Her eyelids felt sealed shut, crusted with ice. Each breath was agony, her lungs rejecting the frozen air. A crackling sound nearby, the scent of wood smoke. A weight across her body, heavy but not crushing. Warmth beginning to seep into her limbs. "Don't try to move yet." The voice was deep, rough, with disuse, like stones rolling down a mountainside. A man's voice, but not Clay's, not Thomas's. Nell forced her eyes open. Firelight danced across log walls. She lay on a bed piled with furs, more furs layered over her. Her wet clothes had been removed, replaced with a man's flannel shirt several sizes too large. Panic flared. She tried to sit up, igniting fresh pain in her ribs. I said, don't move. The voice again closer now. 3 ribs bruised, maybe cracked. Frostbite on your fingers and toes. You're lucky to be alive. A figure moved into her field of vision, tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and a jagged scar running from temple to jaw. His eyes were dark but not cold like Thomas's. These eyes held something else. Something like recognition. You're safe here, he said. No one from town ventures this high, especially in winter. Who? Her voice cracked, her throat raw. Who are you? He turned away, moving to a wood stove where a kettle steamed. Folks down there call me the Keeper, or the Mountain Man, or worse depending on who's talking. He poured hot liquid into a tin cup. Name's Matthew Blackwood. Most call me Thorn. Blackwood. The name sent a jolt through Nell's foggy mind. Any relation to Agatha Blackwood? The widow who owns half the businesses in town. A muscle twitched in his jaw. She was my mother. Once. Was, not is. Interesting. He brought the cup to her. Willow bark tea, for the pain. Nell hesitated before taking it, a nurse's caution. If I wanted to harm you, he said, reading her thoughts, I wouldn't have carried you 3 miles through a blizzard to do it. She accepted the cup, wincing, as her raw fingers touched the warm metal. Thank you for saving me. Thorn nodded once, a man unaccustomed to gratitude. Found you half buried in snow at the base of Eagle Cliff. Fall like that should have killed you. The drift must have broken your descent. Memories began to return, fleeing into the storm, struggling up the mountain path as the snow grew deeper. Following Rebecca's map until the ground disappeared beneath her feet. How long have I been here? 2 days. Storm still raging. No one will be searching until it passes. But they would search. Clay wouldn't allow his possession to simply vanish. His pride wouldn't permit it. You're Clay Winter's wife, Thorne said, confirming he knew exactly who she was. The nurse from back east. Eleanor, she offered, though most call me Nell. Nell. He tested the name, then gave a short nod as if approving. Rest. We'll talk more when you're stronger. He moved away, settling into a chair near the fire, picking up a book. Nell studied the cabin through half-closed eyes. One large room with a sleeping loft above. Bookshelves lined one wall, unexpected in a mountain hermit's dwelling. A rifle stood propped by the door. Everything neat, orderly, purposeful. As sleep reclaimed her, Nell's hand went to her pocket, seeking Rebecca's map and ring. Gone along with her wet clothes. Panic fluttered again, but exhaustion won, pulling her back into darkness. She woke to sunlight streaming through small windows. The storm had passed. Nell lay still, cataloging her injuries with a nurse's precision. Ribs tender but not shifting, bruised not broken, fingers and toes painful but responsive, mild frostbite. Various bruises in different stages of healing, some from Clay's last attack, others from her fall. The cabin was empty, no sign of Thorne. Carefully, Nell pushed herself to sitting, then to standing. Her clothes, dry now, were folded on a nearby chair. The effort of dressing left her breathless, pain radiating from her ribs. She moved slowly around the cabin, learning its secrets. The bookshelves held an eclectic collection, medical texts, philosophy, poetry, and several Bibles, one well-worn with pages marked and corners dog-eared. On a small table lay her possessions from that night, the bundled food now spoiled. Her mother's locket, and Rebecca's map and ring. The door opened. Thorne entered, carrying an armload of firewood. He paused when he saw her standing. You should be resting. I've rested enough. She straightened despite the pain, unwilling to appear weak. I need to know what happens now. He stacked the wood beside the stove with methodical movements. That depends on you. Once you're strong enough, I can take you to the train station at Clearwater. From there, you could reach Denver, then points east. And if Clay's men are watching the trains, then there are other routes, slower but safer. Nell studied him. You've done this before, helped women escape. It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. Yes. Why? Thorne stilled his back to her. When he turned, his expression was carefully neutral. Because no one helped my sister. The simple statement held volumes of pain. I'm sorry, Nell said softly. Don't be. She's been gone a long time. He moved to the stove, adding wood to the fire. You should eat, regain your strength. He prepared a simple meal, venison stew bread that looked homemade coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. They ate in silence, Thorn offering no conversation, Nell too occupied with her thoughts to make any. Finally, she broached the subject that had been nagging at her. I found something before I fled, a ring belonging to Rebecca Clay's first wife, and a map, the one I was following when I fell. Thorn's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Rebecca Winters. She came through here 5 years ago. She didn't die of fever. No. Did she make it to wherever she was going? He hesitated. She left here with a guide who was taking a group of Chinese workers to San Francisco. I received word they reached Sacramento. After that, nothing. You keep track of them, the women who pass through, when I can. He stood collecting their empty bowls. Some want to disappear completely. Others send word when they're safe to help those who come after them. Nell thought of Margaret Mason's warning of the white lily stone of Mrs. Santiago's embroidered shawl. The white lily, it's a sign, isn't it, for women who need help? Thorn's eyes met hers, assessing. You know more than most who stumble up here. I'm piecing it together, the white lily, the Moonlight Road. They're part of a system to help women escape. We call it the Moonlight Road, he confirmed, a network of safe houses and guides stretching from here to the coast. The lily marks those who can be trusted. And you're what the beginning of the road. For some. He moved to a window gazing out at the snow-covered mountains. For others, just a way station. Nell approached, careful to keep distance between them. She'd learned long ago to be wary of a man's space, a man's moods. Why do they call you the keeper of the highlands? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I didn't choose the name. The mining family started it, mostly the Mexican and Chinese workers. They said I keep watch over the high country like the saints they pray to. And the rumors that you were once a preacher, the almost smile vanished. I was, a lifetime ago. Before she could ask more, a sound outside caught their attention, the distant report of a rifle. Thorn moved instantly to the door, rifle in hand. Stay inside, he ordered, away from the windows. He slipped out, leaving Nell alone with her racing heart. Minutes passed, then half an hour. Just as she was beginning to fear the worst, the door opened and Thorn entered, expression grim. Hunters, he said, but not for deer. Nell's stomach clenched. Clay? His men, 3 of them with tracking dogs. They're still in the lower valley, but heading this way. They're looking for me. It wasn't a question. Yes, but they won't find you, not if we move quickly. He crossed to a chest in the corner, pulling out heavy coats and boots. There's another cabin higher up, more isolated. We need to reach it before nightfall. You're coming with me. Thorn paused in his preparations. You think I'd send you alone into these mountains with 3 armed men hunting you? His matter-of-fact tone made Nell ashamed of her suspicion. No, I'm sorry, I'm not used to men who help without wanting something in return. Something flickered in his eyes, anger but not directed at her. I know what kind of man Clayton Winters is. I know what he's done to you and to others before you. He handed her a coat and boots. I'm not him. I'm not Thomas. I'm not the judge. Put those on. We leave in 10 minutes. As Nell donned the winter gear, she noticed Thorn packing supplies, food, medicine, ammunition. He moved with practiced efficiency, a man accustomed to quick departures. What about Rebecca's ring and map? She asked. Should I bring them? Thorn considered. The map? Yes, it might be useful. The ring? It's your choice. But remember, anything that connects you to your old life is a potential danger. Nell picked up the silver band, rolling it between her fingers. This small circle of metal had belonged to a woman who had stood where she now stood, facing the same choices, the same fears. Had Rebecca made it to safety? Was she alive somewhere with a new name, a new life? Or had Clay's reach extended beyond the mountains after all? She slipped the ring into her pocket, not to keep but as a reminder of what was at stake. Outside, the winter sun cast long shadows across pristine snow. Thorn led the way, breaking trail through drifts that sometimes reached his knees. Nell followed in his footsteps, each breath sending daggers through her injured ribs. They climbed steadily, the forest growing denser, the air thinner. Twice Thorn called a halt, allowing Nell to rest. He never asked if she could continue, never suggested she wasn't strong enough. He simply waited until her breathing steadied, then pressed on. As the light began to fade, they crested a ridge. Below, nestled against the mountain face and sheltered by towering pines, stood a smaller cabin. From this angle, it was nearly invisible, its log construction blending with the surrounding trees, its roof covered in snow that disguised its outline. The lighthouse, Nell breathed, understanding now why Rebecca had called it that. From the valley below, a light in its window would appear as a distant star, a beacon to those who knew to look for it. Thorne glanced at her sharply. How did you know that name? It was on Rebecca's map. Find the lighthouse on the mountain. He will help those like us. A shadow crossed his face. Rebecca was hopeful, sometimes too hopeful. Before Nell could ask what he meant, a sound reached them, the distant baying of hounds carried on the evening wind. They're following our trail, Thorne said grimly. We need to move, now. They descended toward the hidden cabin as darkness fell, the howling of the dogs growing closer with each passing minute. Behind them, men's voices called to each other through the gathering night. The hunters had picked up their scent. The chase was on. The lighthouse cabin clung to the mountainside like a stubborn memory, half hidden among ancient pines. Unlike Thorne's main dwelling, this structure seemed designed to disappear. Its weathered logs darkened by years of snow and wind, its single window positioned to be invisible from below. Only when standing directly before it did the cabin fully reveal itself. Thorne led Nell inside, securing the door behind them. The interior was smaller than his other cabin, but similarly organized: a wood stove, a narrow bed, shelves of supplies. He moved with practiced efficiency, lighting a lantern, but keeping its flame low. No fire yet, he said. Smoke would give us away. The baying of hounds echoed through the mountains closer now. Nell's heart hammered against her bruised ribs. They'll find us, she whispered. No. Thorne pulled a trap door hidden beneath a worn rug, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Down, quickly. Nell hesitated only a moment before lowering herself into the unknown, wincing as her injured body protested. The space below was cold and smelled of earth and pine. Thorne followed, pulling the trapdoor closed above them. In the darkness, she heard him moving. Then a match flared. He lit a small candle set in a niche in the earthen wall, illuminating what appeared to be a root cellar converted to a hiding place. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with preserved food and water. A narrow cot occupied another corner, with blankets neatly folded. The Chinese miners dug this, Thorne explained, his voice low. When the anti-Chinese riots swept through the territory 10 years ago, I've expanded it since. You've hidden others here, he nodded. This is where the Moonlight Road truly begins. We'll wait until they pass, then move at first light. Above them, silence stretched taut as a wire. Then came the crunch of boots on snow approaching the cabin. Men's voices, muffled but distinguishable. Spread out. Check the perimeter. Tracks lead right to the door, Collins. Could be the mountain man's place. Heard he has cabins all over these hills. Winters wants his wife back, alive, he said. After what she's done, he'll kill her himself. Nell pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sound. Thorne moved closer, not touching her, but offering his presence as reassurance. The cabin door above creaked open. Boots stomped across the floor. Drawers opened and closed. A man cursed. Nothing. Place looks abandoned. Fire's cold. No one's been here in days. Dogs are still going crazy. They smell something. Probably just animals. Wolves, maybe. We should burn it. Send a message to anyone helping her. A pause, then no. Too much snow might start a forest fire. Winters wants his wife, not a mountain of ash. We'll head back, try again tomorrow with more men. The door slammed shut. Footsteps receded. The hounds' baying gradually faded into the distance. Still, Thorne and Nell remained motionless, barely breathing for what felt like hours. Finally, Thorne exhaled. They're gone for now. Nell sank onto the cot, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The reality of her situation crashed over her like an icy wave. She had fled her husband, a powerful man with resources and connections. Men were hunting her through the wilderness. If caught, she would face what, imprisonment in her own home, or worse. Why do they want me back so badly, she whispered. Clay has never loved me. I'm just property to him. Thorne settled on a wooden crate across from her, the candle's glow casting half his face in shadow, the scar on his cheek a dark line against his skin. It's not about love, he said quietly. It's about control, about not letting anyone, especially a woman, defy them. If one wife escapes, others might try. The whole system they've built begins to crack. System. His eyes met hers, dark and knowing. You've seen it yourself, the missing women, the convenient fevers and consumptions, the closed caskets, the wives who supposedly run off with traveling salesmen. A chill ran through Nell that had nothing to do with the cold cellar. How many bueno? In Thornridge alone, at least 7 in the past decade that I know of, more in other mining towns across the territory. And no one investigates. No one questions. Who would investigate? The sheriff, the territorial judge? They're all part of it. Thorne's voice had gone flat, emotionless, as if distancing himself from horrors too large to contain. The rich men of these towns, the mine owners, the bankers, the politicians, they've created a brotherhood. They protect each other. Their wives are just interchangeable parts. Nell thought of Margaret Mason, of her desperate warning, of Rebecca's ring and map, of Mrs. Santiago, who might already be dead. Tell me about Rebecca, she said suddenly. Clay's first wife. You helped her escape. Something flickered across Thorne's face, pain perhaps, or regret. Yes. And she never reached San Francisco. The guide sent word they had reached Sacramento. After that, nothing. She could have changed her name, moved on. Or Clay found her. Nell finished the thought he wouldn't voice. Thorne nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. I should have gone with her myself. But there were others who needed help then. A Chinese family, the father injured in a mine collapse. I couldn't leave them. It wasn't your fault, Nell said gently. His laugh was bitter. Wasn't it I started this the Moonlight Road? I made promises of safety I couldn't keep. Why did you start it? Thorne was silent for so long Nell thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with suppressed emotion. Because of my sister, Catherine. He spoke the name like a prayer. She married Judge Mason's brother Edward. The first year seemed happy enough, then the bruises began. The accidents. I was serving as pastor in Thornridge then. I tried to intervene, spoke to Edward man to man, counseled Catherine to be patient to pray. Self-loathing twisted his features. I spouted scripture about submission and endurance while my sister withered before my eyes. Nell's throat tightened. What happened to her? She died of brain fever after a fall down the stairs. Closed casket funeral. Edward remarried within 6 months. Thorne's hands curled into fists. I demanded an investigation. Went to the sheriff, the town council even wrote to the territorial governor. No one would listen. Instead, they closed ranks. Suddenly, my congregation dwindled. Rumors spread that I was unstable, drinking too much inappropriate with female parishioners. They destroyed your reputation. They tried to destroy me completely. One night, Edward and several others, including Clay Winters and Nathaniel Mason, caught me alone after services, beat me half to death, and threw me off Eagle Cliff, the same place where I found you. Nell gasped. How did you survive? Providence, stubbornness, hate. His smile was grim. A band of Chinese miners found me, nursed me back to health in a hidden camp deep in the mountains. By the time I recovered, Edward had spread word that I'd fled town in disgrace. My mother publicly disowned me. Catherine was forgotten. But you didn't leave. You stayed and created the Moonlight Road. I couldn't save Catherine, but I could try to save others. His eyes locked with hers. That's why Clay wants you back so desperately, Nell. It's not just about you. It's about me, about proving that I can't protect the women they've marked as theirs. The realization struck Nell like a physical blow. She wasn't just running from an abusive husband. She had unwittingly stepped into a war that had been raging for years, a war between powerful men who saw women as possessions and one man determined to break their system. I'm sorry, she whispered, for Catherine, for all of them. Thorne looked away. Don't be sorry, be angry. Anger keeps you alive in these mountains. Dawn painted the snow in shades of rose and gold. Thorne had emerged from the cellar an hour earlier to scout the surroundings, returning with news that their pursuers had indeed retreated to town. But they'll be back, he said, packing supplies into a rucksack. With more men, maybe dogs again. Nell nodded, wrapping a woolen scarf around her neck. Her nurse's training had taught her to focus on immediate problems. Right now, that meant survival. Where will we go? Thorne hesitated. There's a place about half a day's journey higher up. Few know about it. Another cabin. More than that. He shouldered the pack. You'll see when we get there. They set out as the sun cleared the eastern ridges, thorn-breaking trail through knee-deep snow. Nell followed, her body aching but her resolve firm. The higher they climbed, the more spectacular the views became, vast expanses of white-clad peaks stretching to the horizon, valleys filled with mist forests of pine and fir standing sentinel on every slope. Under different circumstances, Nell might have found it beautiful. Now she saw only exposure, vulnerability. Every open space was a place where hunters might spot them. They paused at midday in the shelter of an overhanging cliff. Thorne produced jerky and hardtack from his pack along with a flask of strong coffee. They ate in silence, conserving energy. Tell me about the war, Thorne said suddenly. You were a nurse. Nell looked up, surprised by the personal question from a man who had shared so little of himself until now. Yes, with the Union Army. I volunteered after my brother died at Antietam. You must have seen terrible things. Terrible, yes, but also, she searched for words, moments of grace. Boys not old enough to shave facing death with incredible courage. Surgeons working until they collapsed from exhaustion. Soldiers from opposite sides sharing water tobacco stories. And afterward, how did you come to marry Clay Winters? Nell stared at the steam rising from her coffee. After the war, there weren't many options for unmarried women. I tried to continue nursing, but the hospitals preferred men. I was staying with a cousin in St. Louis when Clay appeared. He was charming then. Told stories of Montana territory, of building a new life away from the war's shadows. I was naive enough to believe him. You were looking for escape, Thorne observed. There's no shame in that. Perhaps not, but I exchanged one battlefield for another. She met his gaze. You understand that, I think, moving from one war to the next. Something shifted in his expression, recognition perhaps. Before he could respond, a sound reached them, distant but distinct. Voices carried on the mountain air. Thorne was on his feet instantly, pack in hand. They've returned sooner than expected. We need to move, now. They abandoned their rest, pushing upward through increasingly rugged terrain. The voices faded, then returned, sometimes seeming to come from multiple directions, a trick of the mountain acoustics. By mid-afternoon, clouds had gathered and snow began to fall again, a blessing that would cover their tracks, but a curse that made travel more treacherous. Nell's breath came in painful gasps, her ribs protesting each step. Still she pressed on, following Thorne's broad back through the gathering storm. They crested a ridge to find a narrow path winding between towering rock formations. Thorne moved more cautiously here, testing each step. Careful, he warned. Sheer drop to the right. Stay close to the wall. Nell pressed herself against the cold stone, shuffling sideways along the precarious path. The wind tore at her clothes, threatening to pluck her from the mountainside. Through the swirling snow, she could make out only glimpses of the chasm beside them, a dizzying void that seemed to hunger for the unwary. After what felt like hours, the path widened, turning inward toward the mountain itself. Ahead loomed a dark opening, a cave entrance partially hidden by an outcropping of rock. Almost there, Thorne called over his shoulder. They reached the cave just as the storm intensified, wind howling like a living thing around the mountains. Inside, protected from the elements, Nell leaned against the cold stone wall, struggling to catch her breath. Thorne produced a lantern from his pack, lighting it to reveal a tunnel extending deeper into the mountain. This way, he said. Watch your step. The passage wound inward, sometimes narrowing until they had to turn sideways to proceed, other times opening into small chambers, where evidence of human presence, stacked firewood, crude benches, suggested this was more than a natural formation. The Chinese miners again, Nell asked, gesturing to a support beam shoring up a section of ceiling. Thorne nodded. They knew these mountains better than anyone. Created a whole network of passages during the worst of the persecution. The tunnel curved sharply, then opened into a space so unexpected that Nell stopped short, unable to process what she was seeing. They stood at the edge of an enormous cavern, its ceiling lost in shadows despite Thorne's lantern. But it wasn't the size that stole Nell's breath, it was what the cavern contained. Cabins, a dozen small structures built within the protected space of the mountain itself. Some were little more than lean-tos. Others, more substantial dwellings with stone chimneys that disappeared into flues carved through the rock. Between them ran narrow pathways, some lined with what appeared to be garden plots covered for winter. At the center, a spring bubbled up from the ground, forming a small pool before disappearing again into the earth. Most surprising of all were the people. As Thorne held up his lantern, figures emerged from the cabins, women of various ages, some with children clinging to their skirts. A few men as well, mostly elderly or visibly injured. Their faces reflected a mixture of wariness and recognition as they spotted Thorne. "What is this place?" Nell whispered. "The end of the moonlight road for some, a beginning for others." Thorne moved forward, raising his voice to address the gathered people. "It's all right, she's one of us." A young woman stepped forward, her swollen belly indicating advanced pregnancy. With a start, Nell recognized her Sarah, the wife of a miner from the North Ridge, who had disappeared 3 months earlier after her husband had been killed in a cave-in. "Mrs. Winters?" Sarah asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "Just Nell now," she replied softly. Sarah's face broke into a tentative smile. "They said you helped Santiago's wife, that you were one of the few women from town who showed kindness." Before Nell could respond, a child's cry echoed through the cavern. From one of the larger cabins emerged a slender figure carrying an infant. As she approached, Nell gasped, "Mrs. Mason." Margaret Mason looked nothing like the frail, consumptive wife who had pressed the lily stone into Nell's palm weeks earlier. Her face had color, her movements were steady, and the persistent cough had vanished. "Hello, Eleanor," she said. "I see you found the moonlight road after all." The cavern settlement, which its inhabitants called Haven, was a marvel of ingenuity and desperation. Originally discovered by Chinese miners fleeing persecution, it had been expanded over the years by those seeking refuge from the brutal realities of frontier life. A natural chimney in the rock allowed smoke from carefully managed fires to escape without revealing the settlement's location. The spring provided fresh water year-round. Small gardens supplemented by hunting and trading with sympathetic outsiders sustained the community through the harsh mountain winters. "Most don't stay permanently," Margaret explained as she showed Nell around. "This is a way station, a place to heal and prepare for the journey onward." The infant in her arms fussed, and Margaret adjusted her hold. "This is Emma, not the judge's child, of course. He was incapable, though he blamed me for our childlessness. Emma's father was a young man who worked in our stables. The judge had him whipped and driven from town when he discovered us together. I feared for my life after that and for my unborn child's." "So you faked your illness," Nell realized. "The consumption." Margaret nodded. "Thorne provided herbs that, when taken regularly, produced symptoms similar enough to fool the doctor. When the time was right, I worsened dramatically. The judge sent for specialists from Helena, but before they arrived, I had already escaped up the mountain." "And the judge believes you are dead." "A closed casket funeral was held 2 weeks ago. I'm told he played the grieving widower convincingly." Her smile was bitter. "He'll remarry within months, I expect. Some other unfortunate woman who doesn't yet know what he really is." They continued their tour, Margaret introducing Nell to other residents of Haven. There was Rachel, who had fled her father's house when he tried to marry her to a man 50 years her senior. Maylin, whose minor husband had been killed in an accident after organizing workers. Old Jacob, a former slave who had made his way west after the war, only to find new forms of bondage in the mining camps. All of them shared the same haunted look behind their eyes, people who had seen the darkness that could live in human hearts, who had survived by their wits and the kindness of strangers. "And everyone here is part of the Moonlight Road?" Nell asked. "In one way or another," Margaret confirmed. "Some stay to help newcomers. Others move on, but establish safe houses along the route west. A few return to the world with new identities, sending information or supplies when they can." She led Nell to a small cabin near the spring. "You can rest here. There are clean clothes inside, and Rachel will bring food shortly." Left alone, Nell surveyed her temporary home. Like Thorne's cabins, it was simple but well organized. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a small table and chair, a shelf holding a few books, candles, and basic supplies. On the table lay a fresh bandage and a jar of salve. Someone, having noticed her injuries, needed attention. For the first time since fleeing Thornridge, Nell felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. Here, surrounded by others who understood who had walked similar paths, perhaps she could finally breathe. She changed into the clean clothes, a simple skirt and blouse worn but well mended, and washed her face in a basin of spring water. As she smoothed her hair back, she caught sight of her reflection in a small mirror hanging on the wall. The face that stared back was thinner, paler, but somehow more alive than the ghost she'd glimpsed in the Winter's kitchen window weeks ago. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Thorne stood outside, looking uncomfortable in the confined space of the settlement after the freedom of his mountain. "You're settling in?" he asked, more statement than question. "Yes, it's not what I expected. Few find what they expect in these mountains." He hesitated, then gestured toward the main cavern. "There's someone you should meet when you're ready." Curious Nell followed him through the settlement to a cabin set slightly apart from the others. Unlike the rough-hewn dwellings surrounding it, this structure showed signs of skilled craftsmanship, detailed carvings on the door frame glass in its single window. Thorne knocked once, then pushed the door open without waiting for a response. The cabin's interior was dominated by a large work table covered with papers, maps, and what appeared to be ledgers. Shelves lined the walls packed with books and rolled documents. Seated at the table was an elderly woman with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun, her posture rigid despite her advanced years. When she looked up, her sharp eyes seemed to pierce through Nell like physical things. "So," the woman said, her voice surprisingly strong, "this is Clayton's latest victim." Nell stiffened at the blunt assessment. Before she could respond, Thorne stepped forward. "Nell, this is Agatha Blackwood, my mother." Shock rendered Nell momentarily speechless. Agatha Blackwood, widow of Thornridge's founder, owner of the town bank, and several businesses renowned for her coldness toward other women and her rigid adherence to propriety. The same Agatha who, according to Thorne, had publicly disowned him. "You seem surprised, Mrs. Winters," Agatha observed dryly. "Did you think a woman of my age and standing would be comfortably ensconced in town, turning a blind eye to men's barbarities? You've always seemed so unsympathetic, judgmental, a willing participant in the subjugation of my own sex." Agatha's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Good. That was precisely the impression I wished to convey." Nell looked between mother and son, confusion evident on her face. Thorne's expression remained unreadable, but tension radiated from his posture. "Perhaps you should explain, mother," he said, the word carrying a weight of unresolved history. Agatha sighed, gesturing for Nell to sit in a chair opposite her. "The Moonlight Road didn't begin with my son, Mrs. Winters. It began with me nearly 30 years ago, when my husband decided I had outlived my usefulness." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a jagged scar running from wrist to elbow. "William Blackwood built Thornridge from nothing, it's true, but he built it on the backs of desperate men and the bodies of inconvenient women. When I discovered his involvement in the disappearance of a young widow who had refused his advances, he tried to add me to his list of victims." "But you survived," Nell said. "I did more than survive. I turned his weapon against him, then made it appear he had taken his own life in a fit of despair over mining debts." Agatha's voice was matter-of-fact, as if describing nothing more significant than a change in the weather. "I inherited everything, his businesses, his properties, his position of respect in the community. And I used that position to help other women when I could, while maintaining the facade of the proper widow. Yet you disowned your own son," Nell couldn't help saying, glancing at Thorne. Something like pain flickered across Agatha's face. "Publicly, yes, it was necessary. When Matthew began asking too many questions about Catherine's death, making accusations against men like Judge Mason and Clayton Winters, I knew they would silence him as they had silenced others. The only way to protect him and the Moonlight Road was to separate myself from him completely." "A decision made without consulting me," Thorne said, his voice tight. "You were half dead when they brought you to me," Agatha snapped, a flash of the formidable woman she must have been in her prime breaking through her elderly facade. "What would you have had me do? Declare war on the most powerful men in the territory? We would both have been dead within a week, and with us any hope of helping others escape." The tension between mother and son crackled like static before a lightning strike. Decades of pain, misunderstanding, and separate battles fought for the same cause, had created a chasm that even their shared purpose couldn't fully bridge. Nell cleared her throat. So all this time you've been working together, the Moonlight Road has operated with your knowledge, your resources. Agatha nodded. I provide funds information, occasional transportation for those fleeing east rather than west. Matthew oversees the mountain routes and this settlement. Others manage different sections of the road. It's a network, Mrs. Winters. No single person knows all of it, which is how it has survived despite numerous attempts to destroy it. And the White Lily, the signals? My creation, Agatha said with a hint of pride. In the language of flowers, the lily represents rebirth. Appropriate, wouldn't you say? Before Nell could respond, a commotion arose outside. Voices called in alarm. Thorn was at the door instantly, Nell and Agatha following close behind. Rachel stood in the central area of the settlement, supporting a snow-covered figure who appeared on the verge of collapse. Blood stained the snow at their feet. Thorn, Rachel called. It's James. He's been shot. Thorn rushed forward, taking the weight of the injured man from Rachel. Nell followed automatically, her nurse's instincts overriding everything else. The wounded man was young, early 20s perhaps, with the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. Blood seeped through his coat from a wound in his side. Inside, Thorn ordered, carrying James toward the nearest cabin. They laid him on a bed, Nell already rolling up her sleeves. I need hot water, clean cloths, whiskey if you have it, and my medicine kit from your cabin if it survived. Thorn nodded, issuing rapid instructions to those who had gathered. As the needed supplies arrived, Nell cut away the young man's blood-soaked clothing to reveal a bullet wound just below his ribs. The bullet's still inside, she murmured, probing gently. I need to remove it before infection sets in. She worked with practiced efficiency, years of battlefield medicine returning in a rush. Thorn assisted silently, his large hands surprisingly gentle, as he passed instruments and held the lantern to provide better light. Who is he? Nell asked as she extracted the bullet with a pair of forceps, dropping the misshapen lead into a bowl. James Carter, one of our scouts. He watches the trails, brings news from town, guides newcomers to the settlement. Thorn's expression was grim. If he's been shot, it means trouble. As if on cue, James groaned, his eyes fluttering open. Thorn, he gasped. They're coming. Clay Winters, Thomas, the judge. They've gathered a posse, claiming they're hunting a mountain lion that killed livestock. When? Thorn demanded. Dawn, tomorrow. James winced as Nell began stitching his wound. They have maps. Someone's betrayed us. A chill ran through the room. Betrayal. The word hung in the air like poison. How many men? Thorn asked. 20, maybe more. Armed. They plan to sweep the entire ridge. James's voice weakened. I tried to lead them away from the main trails, but Thomas Winters shot me. Said I was interfering with official business. Nell tied off the last stitch and began bandaging the wound. He'll live, but he needs rest. No movement for at least a week. Thorn straightened his face, hardening into something like the mountain itself, implacable, unyielding. Spread the word, he told Rachel, who hovered nearby. Everyone prepares to evacuate. Take only what you can carry. We move at midnight. Evacuate? Nell asked as Rachel hurried away. Where can all these people go in the dead of winter? There are other shelters, smaller, more isolated. We've prepared for this possibility. Thorn's gaze was distant, already calculating routes, supplies, risks. The children and injured will go north to a settlement near the Canadian border. The others will disperse along different sections of the road. And us? Nell asked quietly. Thorn's eyes refocused on her, something unreadable in their depths. That depends on you. If you want to leave with the others, I'll arrange it. But there's another option. What option? We return to Thornridge. Nell stared at him, certain she had misheard. Return to the town where men are actively hunting me, where Clay wants me dead or captive. Not as yourself, not openly. Thorn hesitated, then continued. James's news confirms what Mother has suspected for months. Someone in town is passing information about the Moonlight Road to Clay and his allies. The betrayal came from inside. We need to discover who or more women will die. And you think I can help with that? You're a nurse. You could reverse your turn in disguise, perhaps as a widow seeking work with Dr. Morrison. Your medical skills would give you access to information to households where women might be in danger. The audacity of the plan left Nell speechless. Return to the lion's den, to the very place she had fled at risk of her life. It would be dangerous, Thorne acknowledged. If you were discovered, Clay would kill me, Nell finished flatly. Or worse. Yes, which is why the choice must be yours. No one would think less of you for continuing west. Nell closed her eyes, thoughts whirling. The safer path lay ahead, following the moonlight road to California or Oregon, building a new life far from Clay's reach. The logical choice, the sane choice, yet something held her back. The memory of Mrs. Santiago's bruised face, of Margaret Mason's desperate warning, of Rebecca's ring evidence of another woman who had tried to escape. How many others were still trapped? How many lived in fear, not knowing the moonlight road existed? She opened her eyes to find Thorne watching her, his scarred face impassive but his eyes betraying understanding. He knew what it was to be haunted by those left behind. If I returned, she said slowly, I wouldn't be alone. You'd be nearby. I would never ask you to face this without support, he promised. Mother maintains a hunting cabin on the edge of town. I could stay there close enough to help if needed. Nell took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in her ribs, a reminder of what waited in Thornridge. Yet that pain also strengthened her resolve. She had survived Clay's brutality. She had survived the wilderness. Perhaps she had been spared for a purpose greater than her own freedom. The war taught me something, she said quietly. Sometimes survival itself becomes a form of resistance. Living well despite what they've done to you, that's a victory they can't take away. She straightened her shoulders, decision made. I'll go back, not as Clay's wife, but as someone new, someone stronger. For the first time since she had met him, Thorne smiled a real smile that transformed his stern features, softening the scar and lighting his eyes. You already are stronger, Nell, he said. Stronger than any of them know. Midnight found haven in controlled chaos. Families gathered meager possessions. Children were bundled in layers of clothing. Scouts reported on weather conditions and trail safety. Through it all moved Agatha Blackwood, directing operations with the efficiency of a general. Nell had spent the hours since James's arrival helping prepare medical supplies for each group. Her hands worked automatically, rolling bandages and measuring herbs into packets, while her mind grappled with the enormity of her decision. Return to Thornridge. Face Clay and Thomas, albeit in disguise. Seek out a traitor who had already endangered countless lives. Fear and doubt gnawed at her resolve, yet underneath ran a current of something unfamiliar, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since the war, when her skills had meant the difference between life and death for wounded soldiers. You should rest, Margaret said, appearing at her side with a cup of tea. Tomorrow will bring challenges enough. Nell accepted the tea gratefully. There's too much to do. Others can manage. Margaret sat beside her on a bench near the spring. Tell me what made you decide to return. Few who escape that town ever willingly go back. I'm not entirely sure, Nell admitted. Perhaps because I couldn't save the boys who died under my care during the war. Perhaps because I'm tired of running. Margaret studied her thoughtfully. Or perhaps because you've glimpsed something in Thorne that makes you believe this fight can be won. Heat rose in Nell's cheeks. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Margaret's smile was knowing. I've watched him these past months. He's carried this burden alone for so long, his sister's death, the women he couldn't save, the constant weight of others' survival. Since you arrived, something has changed. He seems lighter. We barely know each other, Nell protested. Sometimes the soul recognizes what the mind has yet to understand. Margaret rose, her infant daughter stirring in the sling across her chest. Whatever your reasons, I'm grateful. The Moonlight Road needs people willing to stand and fight, not just flee. As Margaret walked away, Nell's gaze drifted to where Thorne stood with his mother examining maps spread on a makeshift table. Their heads were bent close together, the familial resemblance evident despite decades of estrangement. They moved with similar economy, spoke with similar directness. Two pieces of the same formidable puzzle. What would it be like, Nell wondered, to have such strength in your blood, to come from people who fought rather than submitted? Her own parents had been gentle souls, her father, a bookkeeper, her mother, a midwife. They had taught her kindness, service duty. Valuable lessons, but perhaps insufficient armor for the world she now inhabited. Thorne looked up suddenly, as if sensing her scrutiny. Their eyes met across the cavern, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared purpose, shared risk. Perhaps shared fate. Nell forced herself to look away first. Such thoughts were dangerous. She was a married woman regardless of her flight from Clay. And Thorn? Thorn was a man with a mission that left no room for entanglements. Yet as she resumed her work, Nell couldn't deny the warmth that had bloomed in her chest at that brief connection. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as property, not as an ornament, but as a person of value, of substance. Whatever came next in Thornridge, she would carry that feeling with her, like a talisman against the darkness. The evacuation of Haven proceeded in stages throughout the night. First, the children and elderly, guided by Rachel and two other women, took the northern trail toward the Canadian settlement. Next went those heading west, including Margaret and baby Emma, who would follow the traditional moonlight road to San Francisco. By dawn, only a handful remained: Agatha, Thorn, Nell, and three men who would act as scouts and messengers between them once they separated. The posse will focus on the eastern slopes first, Thorn explained, tracing routes on a map. That gives us time to circle behind them and approach Thorn Ridge from the west. We'll travel separately once we're closer to town, less conspicuous that way. Nell nodded, studying the disguise. Agatha had provided a brown wig, spectacles, clothing appropriate for a middle-aged widow of modest means. Remember your story, Agatha instructed. You're Catherine Wells, recently widowed when your husband's farm failed in Minnesota. You trained as a nurse during the war and are seeking employment with Dr. Morrison. You're reserved, competent, and unremarkable in every way. Catherine, Nell repeated, testing the name. Thorn's sister's name, she realized. A small tribute to the woman whose death had sparked this quiet rebellion. What about you, she asked Thorn. Won't you be recognized in town? Few would connect the disgraced former pastor with the mountain man folk whisper about, he replied. Besides, I won't enter town openly. Mother's cabin provides a vantage point without exposure. Agatha handed Nell a small leather pouch. Emergency funds, and this. She pressed a familiar object into Nell's palm, the stone with the carved lily. If you need to identify yourself to an ally or mark a location as safe. The gravity of what they were attempting settled over Nell. They were not just returning to hostile territory, they were actively seeking to undermine a network of powerful, dangerous men. If caught, death might be the most merciful outcome. One last thing, Agatha said, producing a small vial. Belladonna extract, diluted, it causes symptoms similar to fever. Concentrated. She met Nell's eyes steadily. A last resort if capture is imminent. I've seen what happens to women who fall into their hands. Sometimes death is preferable. Nell pocketed the vial without comment. She had seen enough in war to understand Agatha's pragmatism. As they prepared to depart, Thorn drew Nell aside. You can still change your mind, he said quietly. No one would blame you. Nell looked up at him, this scarred, stoic man who had saved her life and now offered her a chance to save others. She thought of the soldiers she'd nursed, boys who'd marched toward almost certain death because they believed in something larger than themselves. She thought of Catherine, of Rebecca, of all the women who had walked the moonlight road before her. I'm not changing my mind, she said firmly. I'm a nurse. I go where I'm needed. Relief and something warmer flickered in Thorn's eyes. Without warning, he reached out his rough hand, gentle against her cheek. The touch lasted only a moment, brief enough to be imagined, long enough to be felt. Then let's go, he said, dropping his hand. Thornridge awaits. They emerged from the cavern into a world transformed by fresh snow and morning light. Below, the mountain slopes stretched toward the distant rooftops of Thornridge, the town that had once been Nell's prison and would now become her battlefield. Somewhere in those streets walked a traitor. Somewhere in those houses waited women who needed the moonlight road. And somewhere beyond this dangerous mission lay a future Nell could barely imagine, one where she might be not just a survivor but a savior. She took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air, squared her shoulders, and began the descent. Thornridge emerged from the morning mist like a painting, half-erased church steeple. First, then the clustered buildings of Main Street, and finally the grand houses perched on the hillside like predators surveying their domain. From her vantage point on the western ridge, Nell barely recognized the town that had been her prison for 6 years. It seemed smaller somehow, more fragile. Different when you see it from above, Thorn said quietly, standing beside her, less imposing. Nell nodded, adjusting the brown wig that transformed her golden hair. The spectacles pinched her nose and the plain dark clothes felt stiff and unfamiliar. But the disguise was necessary. Catherine Wells needed to enter Thornridge unremarked, unrecognized. Remember, Thorne continued, Dr. Morrison's office is on Pine Street behind the apothecary. He lost his nurse to consumption 2 months ago. Mother's inquiries suggest he's desperate for help. And if he recognizes me, the question that had plagued Nell throughout their journey, he won't. Morrison treated you what twice in 6 years, always in your home with Clay hovering nearby. The man is half blind without his spectacles anyway. True enough, Dr. Morrison was elderly, distracted, and perpetually overworked, the only physician serving both the town and outlying homesteads. He had treated Nell for female hysteria when her hands shook too badly after one of Clay's rages, and once for a fall down the stairs that had left her with cracked ribs not unlike her current injury. What if Clay sees me or Thomas? Thorne's expression hardened. Clay rarely ventures below Hill Street unless it's to the mine offices or the bank. Thomas is more unpredictable, but he's hunting the mountains with the posse. By the time they return empty-handed, you'll be established in your new identity. Nell took a deep breath, willing her racing heart to calm. And you'll be at the hunting cabin if I need to reach you. Mother's messenger, Jacob, will check the hollow oak behind the cemetery each evening. Leave a white stone if you need contact. Thorne hesitated, then added, but only in true emergency. Any communication increases risk. The reality of their plans settled over Nell like a physical weight. For days, perhaps weeks, she would be alone in enemy territory. No one to trust, no one who knew her true identity, just her wits and courage standing between her and discovery. As if sensing her thoughts, Thorne turned to face her fully. You can still choose the road west, Nell. No one would think less of you. She shook her head. I've made my decision. Then take this. He pressed something into her palm, a small knife in a leather sheath. Keep it hidden but accessible. Nell slipped the knife into her boot, oddly comforted by its presence. Thank you. They stood in silence for a moment, the mountain breeze stirring pine needles around them. So much remained unsaid between them. Questions, fears, the strange bond that had formed in their short time together. But the mission ahead left no room for such indulgences. I should go, Nell said at last. The morning stage will be arriving soon. Better if I'm seen coming into town with it like any other traveler. Thorne nodded. I'll watch until you're safely in town. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Nell. She looked back. The sunlight caught in his beard, turning it bronze against his weathered skin. For a moment he seemed to struggle with words, then simply said, be careful. The inadequacy of the phrase hung between them, containing all they couldn't express. I will, she promised, and began her descent toward Thornridge. Dr. Samuel Morrison's office smelled of carbolic acid, camphor, and resignation. The waiting room, little more than a narrow hallway with 3 hard chairs, was empty when Nell entered, but sounds of movement came from the examination room beyond. She smoothed her plain dress, touched the spectacles to ensure they were properly seated, and called out, Hello, Dr. Morrison. Shuffling footsteps approached, and the door opened to reveal a man who had aged a decade in the 6 months since Nell had last seen him. His white hair stood in disarray. His waistcoat was stained, and deep shadows underlined his eyes. Yes. What is it? I'm quite busy. He peered at her through smudged spectacles, recognition absent from his gaze. Catherine Wells, doctor. I've come about the nursing position. Mrs. Blackwood and Helena suggested you might need assistance. At the mention of Agatha Blackwood, Morrison's demeanor shifted from harried to cautious. Agatha sent you. I wasn't aware she concerned herself with my staffing problems. We attend the same church, Nell improvised. When she learned I was seeking a position that would utilize my nursing experience, she mentioned Thornridge. Morrison studied her for a moment, then sighed heavily. Well, I can't deny I need the help. My last nurse, Mrs. Pemberton, succumbed to consumption after the winter set in. Been managing alone since then, and poorly at that. He gestured to the cluttered waiting room. As you can see. I'd be happy to begin immediately, Nell offered. I can start by organizing your supplies, perhaps. Something like relief crossed the doctor's tired face. Yes, that would be most helpful. I have rounds to make this afternoon, several cases of influenza among the mining families. If you could prepare the office for tomorrow's patients. Of course, doctor. He retreated into the examination room, returning moments later with a ring of keys. The medicine cabinet is locked. Can't be too careful with the laudanum and morphine. Supply room is through the back. Living quarters upstairs should you need accommodation. That's very kind. I've been staying at the boarding house, but closer proximity to patients would be advantageous. Morrison nodded absently, already pulling on his coat. Miss Pemberton lived upstairs. Rooms should still be habitable. Meals at the hotel can be charged to my account, within reason, of course. With that, he was gone, leaving Nell alone in the clinic that would become her base of operations in Thornridge. She waited until his footsteps faded before allowing herself a moment of trembling relief. First hurdle cleared. She was in. Nell spent the afternoon as promised, organizing the chaotic supply room, sterilizing instruments, and preparing patient records for the following day. The work was familiar, almost comforting, so different from the ornamental existence Clay had forced upon her. Here her skills mattered. Here she had purpose. As dusk approached, she ventured upstairs to examine what would be her new living quarters. Mrs. Pemberton's room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the alley behind the clinic, perfect for coming and going unobserved should the need arise. Nell sat on the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what she had undertaken. She was back in Thornridge, the town where Clay Winter's word was law. If discovered, she faced not just death, but whatever cruelties his imagination could devise. Yet beneath the fear ran a current of fierce determination. She thought of Haven, of the women and children sheltering in the mountain's embrace, of Rebecca who had fled but never reached safety, of Margaret and baby Emma traveling the moonlight road west, of Mrs. Santiago whose fate remained unknown. For them, she would be brave. For them, she would become Catherine Wells' unremarkable widow, while her eyes and ears worked to uncover the betrayer who threatened the road. A knock at the clinic's front door startled her from these thoughts. Composing herself into Catherine's persona, modest, efficient, slightly timid, Nell descended the stairs to find a young girl waiting, her face tear-stained. "Please, ma'am," the child pleaded. "It's my ma. The baby's coming, but something's wrong. Pa sent me to fetch the doctor." "Dr. Morrison is making rounds," Nell explained gently. "But I'm his nurse. I can help until he returns." "Where do you live, child?" "Mining Camp, North Ridge. I'm Abigail Peters." Peters. The name tugged at Nell's memory. Then it clicked: Henry Peters, one of the miners who had supported Santiago's calls for safer conditions. The same Henry Peters who had mysteriously fallen down a mine shaft 2 weeks after Santiago's execution, breaking both legs. "Let me gather supplies, Abigail." "I'll come at once." Minutes later, Nell followed the girl through Thornridge's back streets toward the humble dwellings that housed mining families. As they passed the grand church at the town center, a figure on the steps caught Nell's attention, a woman in expensive mourning clothes, her back rigid as a steel rod. Agatha Blackwood. Their eyes met briefly as Nell passed. No recognition showed on Agatha's face, but she inclined her head slightly, acknowledgement of a fellow player in their dangerous game. The mining camp sat on the town's northern edge, a collection of rough cabins and canvas tents that housed the workers who extracted Thornridge's wealth while receiving little in return. Children with hollow cheeks played in muddy lanes. Women hung washing on lines strung between dwellings, their hands red and raw from lye soap and cold water. Abigail led Nell to a cabin slightly larger than its neighbors, a foreman's privilege perhaps. Inside, a woman labored on a bed in the corner, her face contorted in pain, her nightdress soaked with sweat and blood. "Mrs. Peters," Nell approached, setting down her medical bag. "I'm Catherine Wells, Dr. Morrison's nurse. I'm here to help." The woman's eyes, glazed with pain, focused briefly. "Baby's wrong," she gasped. "Not turning right." Nell nodded, already rolling up her sleeves. "I need hot water, clean towels, and whiskey if you have it," she instructed Abigail. To Mr. Peters, hovering anxiously nearby, she said, "Sir, please wait outside. This may take some time." Hours passed as Nell worked to turn the breech baby. Her hands remembered the skills learned from her midwife mother, supplemented by battlefield medicine, where women sometimes gave birth amid cannon fire. She spoke soothingly to Mrs. Peters, encouraging, supporting, manipulating the unborn child with careful pressure. Finally, near midnight, a lusty cry filled the cabin as the infant, a boy, emerged into the world. Nell cleaned the baby, wrapped him in a clean cloth, and placed him in his exhausted mother's arms. "He's perfect." Mrs. Peters whispered, tears tracking down her face. Thank you. Nell smiled, the first genuine smile since returning to Thornridge. This moment of life triumphing over hardship was why she had become a nurse, why she had survived the war, survived Clay, survived the mountain, to bring healing where she could. As she packed her supplies, Mr. Peters returned, his weathered face transformed by joy at the sight of his son. We thought we'd lose them both, he said quietly to Nell. Morrison's been too drunk to be much help lately, and with the spring thaw weeks away. You have a strong wife and a healthy son, Nell replied. With proper care, they'll both thrive. Peters reached into his pocket, producing a few coins. It's not much, but... Nell shook her head. No payment necessary. Dr. Morrison's services are covered by the mining company. A small lie, but one she felt justified in telling. The company don't care if we live or die, Peter said bitterly. Not since Santiago tried to organize us. Now they watch us like hawks, looking for any excuse to turn us out. Nell hesitated, then asked carefully, was Santiago a friend of yours? Peters glanced toward the door, lowering his voice. All of us who came up from Mexico together were close. Santiago just had the courage to speak up. Look what it got him. And his wife. What became of her? A shadow crossed Peter's face. Disappeared the night of the big storm. Some say she tried to flee to the high country, where the mountain man helps folks in trouble. Others say he trailed off, unwilling to voice darker possibilities. Nell's heart sank. Mrs. Santiago, who had sought her help, who had never reached Thorne's cabin that night. Another soul lost to Clay's cruelty. If there's nothing else you need, I should return to the clinic, she said, gathering her bag. Dr. Morrison will check on your wife and son tomorrow. As she prepared to leave, Mrs. Peters called softly, Nurse Wells. Nell turned. Yes. The new mother's eyes held something, knowing something cautious. The women here, we help each other. If you ever need anything, information, a place to hide, whatever, you come to us. We remember kindness. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. Nell nodded, understanding passing between them. Thank you, I'll remember that. Outside, the night had turned bitterly cold. Nell pulled her shawl tighter, hurrying through the deserted streets toward the clinic. Her mind raced with the implications of Mrs. Peters' offer. Were the mining families part of the Moonlight Road network, or simply allies through shared suffering? So focused was she on these thoughts that she didn't notice the figure emerging from the shadows until a hand grasped her arm. Well, what have we here? Nell froze, her blood turning to ice. She knew that voice, had heard it so often in her nightmares. Thomas Winters. She kept her head down, praying the dim light, the spectacles, and the wig would conceal her identity. Excuse me, sir. I'm Dr. Morrison's new nurse returning from attending a birth. Thomas's grip tightened. A nurse is a convenient profession for a woman alone. His breath reeked of whiskey and tobacco. What's your name, nurse? Catherine Wells, sir. I've only just arrived in Thornridge. If you'll excuse me, I have patients waiting. She tried to pull away, but Thomas stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. Funny time for Morrison to hire help with half the town talking about his drinking problem. His free hand moved to tilt her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. Have we met before, Catherine Wells? You seem familiar. Nell's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Thomas's eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, studied her face with growing suspicion. No, sir, she managed. I've come from Minnesota. This is my first time in Montana territory. A smile spread across Thomas's face, not relief, but the satisfied expression of a predator scenting blood. Minnesota, you say? Strange, you don't have the accent. Almost sounds like Virginia, perhaps, or Maryland. Virginia, where Nell had been born and raised before the war, before Clay, before everything. Thomas leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You know, my brother's wife was from Virginia. Lovely woman. Nurse during the war. Disappeared in a blizzard months ago. His fingers dug painfully into her arm. Clay's been inconsolable. Imagine his joy if she were found. Terror gripped Nell's throat, choking off response. Thomas knew. Somehow he knew. Then, like divine intervention, a voice called from down the street. Thomas Winters, is that you harassing Morrison's new nurse? Agatha Blackwood approached, her cane tapping a sharp rhythm against the frozen ground. Despite her advanced age, she cut an imposing figure in her morning black spine straight as a rifle barrel. Thomas released Nell's arm but didn't step back. "Mrs. Blackwood, out rather late, aren't you? The church charity meeting ended hours ago." "As did the posse's search, I understand." Agatha's tone was acid. "Yet here you are accosting respectable women instead of reporting to your brother." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Clay knows I have my own methods of investigation." "Indeed, methods that apparently include frightening Dr. Morrison's much-needed nurse." Agatha turned to Nell. "Mrs. Wells, I presume Helena mentioned you might be arriving? I trust your journey was uneventful." Nell seized the lifeline Agatha offered. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for inquiring." "Good. Morrison's patients cannot afford further disruption. My grandson requires treatment for his cough, and I expect competent care." She fixed Thomas with a glacial stare. "The town council might question why the Winters Mining Company provides a doctor who requires constant replacement of staff." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Thomas might suspect Nell's identity, but challenging Agatha Blackwood, whose financial interests rivaled the Winters family's, was another matter entirely. "Of course, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I was merely offering Mrs. Wells an escort back to the clinic. These streets can be dangerous after dark." "I'll see to Mrs. Wells's safety," Agatha declared. "You have matters to attend to at the mine, I'm sure." For a moment Thomas hesitated, clearly reluctant to abandon his prey. Then with a slight bow that mocked them both, he retreated into the shadows. Nell released a shuddering breath. "Thank you," she whispered once Thomas was out of earshot. Agatha's expression remained stern, maintaining their public facade. "Come, Mrs. Wells, I'll walk you to the clinic. We have matters to discuss regarding my grandson's treatment." They proceeded in silence until reaching the clinic's back entrance. Once inside, with doors locked and curtains drawn, Agatha's rigid posture relaxed slightly. "That was careless," she said without preamble. "Thomas Winters is dangerous more so than his brother in many ways. Clay's violence is obvious, predictable. Thomas hides his cruelty behind charm and calculation." "He recognized me," Nell said, removing the spectacles to rub her eyes. "Or suspects, at least." "Of course he does. Thomas has always been observant. But suspicion isn't proof, and he'll need proof before approaching Clay. The humiliation would be too great otherwise." Agatha settled into a chair, suddenly looking every year of her age. "Still, we must accelerate our plans. Thomas will be watching you now." "What plans? I've barely established myself here." "The betrayer," Agatha reminded her. "We need to identify who has been passing information about the Moonlight Road to Clay and his allies. Someone who knows enough to provide maps, routes, safe house locations." Nell paced the small room, mind racing. It must be someone with access to multiple parts of the network. Someone trusted. Precisely. Few have such comprehensive knowledge. Myself, Matthew, perhaps 3 others. Agatha's gaze was piercing. "One of whom is in this town." "Who saw him?" "Reverend Porter." The name struck Nell like a physical blow. "The minister? But he's always seemed so pious." "Piety and virtue are not the same thing, my dear." Agatha's smile was grim. "Porter has been part of the Moonlight Road since its beginning. He provides spiritual comfort to those fleeing, and his church connections offer legitimate means of transportation, missionary groups, charity, caravans, and such. But why would he betray the road? What could Clay possibly offer him? That's what you need to discover. Porter holds confession hours tomorrow afternoon. I suggest you unburden your soul to him." Nell understood the implication. Approach Porter, as Catherine Wells perhaps hint at knowledge of the Moonlight Road, gauge his reaction. "And if he is the betrayer, what then?" Agatha's eyes hardened. "Then Matthew and I will handle it. Your task is confirmation only." The cold practicality in the older woman's voice sent a chill through Nell. What did handling it entail? She didn't ask. Some knowledge was better left unacquired. "There's something else," Nell said, changing the subject. "The mining families, I think they may be allies. Mrs. Peters said something tonight about women helping each other, remembering kindness. The Mexican and Chinese workers have always been sympathetic to the road. They understand persecution better than most." Agatha rose, adjusting her mourning veil. "Use that connection, but carefully. Clay's spies are everywhere." As Agatha prepared to leave through the back door, Nell asked the question that had been haunting her. Mrs. Santiago, did she make it to the road? Sadness flickered across Agatha's stern features. No, she was intercepted before reaching Matthew's cabin. Thomas personally. She stopped, apparently deciding Nell didn't need those details. She's gone. Remember that when your resolve wavers. With that, Agatha slipped into the night, leaving Nell alone with the weight of their conspiracy and the growing certainty that Thomas Winters would not rest until he confirmed his suspicions about Catherine Wells. The following days established a routine for Nell's new identity. Mornings were spent at the clinic assisting Dr. Morrison with patients, mostly minors, suffering from lung ailments, children with winter coughs, the occasional injury. Afternoons often took her to the mining camp or outlying farms for house calls. Morrison was too indisposed to make himself. The doctor's drinking problem, which Nell had only vaguely known about during her time as Clay's wife, now revealed itself in full. By midday, Morrison's hands typically trembled too badly for delicate procedures. By evening, he was rarely coherent. Nell found herself essentially running the practice with townsfolk tacitly acknowledging the arrangement by coming directly to Nurse Wells with their ailments. This unexpected authority provided cover for her true mission. No one questioned her movements around town, her conversations with various residents, her presence in places where Clay Winter's wife would never have been permitted. Through it all, Thomas watched from a distance. She would glimpse him across the street as she exited the general store, or find him engaged in seemingly casual conversation with patients as they left the clinic, never approaching directly after their first encounter, but always present, always observing. On the third day, Nell finally visited Reverend Porter for confession. The church stood at Thornridge's center, its white steeple visible from every corner of town, a physical representation of its centrality to community life. Inside, the nave was empty during the afternoon confession hours, just as Agatha had predicted. Nell slipped into the confessional booth, heart pounding beneath her prim dress. Through the lattice screen, she could make out Porter's profile, a man in his 50s with silver at his temples and a perpetually solemn expression. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned, she began, deliberately using Catholic phrasing that would immediately signal something amiss in this Protestant church. Porter stiffened. This is not that kind of confessional, Mrs. Wells. We Presbyterians believe in direct communion with God. Of course, forgive me. Nell lowered her voice further. I'm new to your denomination. In Minnesota, my congregation was different. Minnesota. Porter turned slightly toward the screen. Mrs. Blackwood mentioned you had come from there. Seeking a fresh start after your husband's passing, I understand. Yes, though I confess Thornridge is not what I expected. There are whispers about this town, about women who disappear, about a road that leads to freedom. The silence that followed was profound. Nell held her breath, watching for Porter's reaction. His hands clasped before him tightened until the knuckles showed white. Mrs. Wells, he finally said, voice barely audible. Such talk is dangerous in Thornridge. There are those who would misinterpret innocent concerns. I seek only truth, Reverend, and perhaps a path for others who might need it. Porter abruptly stood. Join me in my study. These matters require privacy. Nell followed the minister through the church to a small office behind the pulpit. Once the door closed, Porter's demeanor changed completely, the pious calm replaced by nervous energy. Who sent you? He demanded. Was it Matthew or Agatha? The direct question caught Nell off guard. I don't know what you mean. Please. Porter ran a hand through his silver hair. I've been in Thornridge 20 years. I know when someone is testing me, especially regarding the road. Nell decided on a partial truth. I've heard stories about women escaping abusive situations, about a network that helps them. I thought, given your position, that I might be part of it. Porter's laugh was bitter. I was, once, before I understood the quad. What cost? Porter moved to a window overlooking the church cemetery, his back to Nell. You're new here. You don't understand how things work in Thornridge. The Winters family, Judge Mason, the other pillars of the community, they don't tolerate interference in what they consider private matters. You mean they don't tolerate women escaping their control? Precisely. Porter turned, his expression haunted. 3 years ago, I helped a young woman leave town, Alice Grantham, the pharmacist's daughter. Her father had arranged her marriage to Judge Mason, a man 40 years her senior, who had already buried 2 wives. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen. What happened to her? She made it to California, started a new life. His voice broke slightly. Then last year, Clay Winters showed me a letter from Alice to her mother. It contained details, names, locations, routes of the Moonlight Road. Understanding dawned. They found her. Porter nodded. Clay made it very clear either I provide information about the road's operations or Alice and her mother would suffer the consequences. A week later, to prove his seriousness, he had Thomas break the pharmacist's fingers. One by one, said it was a robbery gone wrong. So you've been feeding them information. Nell said, horror and pity warring within her. Betraying the road to protect Alice. Not willingly. Porter's eyes filled with tears. I've tried to limit what I share to give false leads when possible. But they check my information. And when they find discrepancies, he rolled up his sleeve, revealing a forearm mottled with burn scars. Thomas is creative with his punishments. Nell sank into a chair, the implications staggering. Porter wasn't a willing betrayer. He was a man caught in an impossible position, trying to minimize harm while under constant threat. Does anyone from the road know about this, about Alice? How could I tell them Matthew would storm into town, confront Clay directly? People would die. Porter shook his head. I've prayed for guidance, for a way out that doesn't end in bloodshed. But Clay holds all the power here. A thought occurred to Nell, a dangerous, desperate thought. What if Clay didn't hold the power anymore? Porter stared at her as if she'd suggested moving the mountain itself. What do you mean? Clay's authority comes from fear, from the belief that he's untouchable. But what if there was evidence of his crimes? Something that even Judge Mason couldn't ignore. Such evidence would never reach the proper authorities. The sheriff, the judge, the territorial representative, all are in Clay's pocket. Then it goes above them, to the governor, to newspapers in Helena and beyond. Nell leaned forward, an idea taking shape. The mining families keep records, don't they? Of accidents of men who disappear. Porter nodded slowly. Yes, Santiago was creating such a record before they killed him. And you must have knowledge of the women who have vanished, dates, circumstances. I keep a private journal. Porter's voice strengthened slightly. Names, dates, as much detail as I can gather without raising suspicion. I thought perhaps someday when I'm bored, someone might find it, might seek justice. Why wait? Nell stood, energy coursing through her. Together with the miners' records, your journal could expose everything, the abuses, the disappearances, the entire system Clay and the others have built. Hope and fear warred on Porter's face. Even if we gathered such evidence, how would it reach the outside world? Clay watches the mail, the telegraph, the stage lines. The Moonlight Road has its ways, Nell assured him, routes that bypass Clay's surveillance. Porter studied her with newfound intensity. Who are you really, Catherine Wells? No ordinary nurse speaks of toppling, powerful men as if discussing the weather. Nell hesitated, weighing the risk of truth against the need for Porter's trust. Before she could decide, the church door opened, voices echoing in the nave. Porter gestured for silence, moving to his study door. Reverend, a man called, are you here? I've brought the donation from the Winters Mining Company for the Orphans Fund. Thomas, the timing couldn't be coincidence. A moment, Mr. Winters, Porter called, his ministerial voice returning seamlessly. To Nell, he whispered, the side door, quickly, and Mrs. Wells, be careful. They're watching more closely than you know. Nell slipped out as directed, circling behind the church through the cemetery. Her mind raced with the implications of Porter's revelation. Not a willing betrayer, but a man caught in Clay's web, forced to compromise to protect others. She needed to get word to Thorne. As dusk gathered, Nell made her way to the hollow oak behind the cemetery. Glancing around to ensure she wasn't observed, she placed a white stone in the tree's cavity, the signal for urgent contact. That night, she barely slept, alternating between planning and listening for any sound that might indicate Thomas had discovered her identity. By morning, exhaustion had left dark circles beneath her eyes visible, despite the spectacles Catherine Wells always wore. The clinic was unusually busy. A mine accident had left several men with minor injuries, keeping Nell too occupied to dwell on fears or plans. By mid-afternoon, as she was treating the last patient's lacerated hand, Dr. Morrison appeared in the doorway, surprisingly sober. "Mrs. Wells, I've just received word from the Winters residence. Mrs. Blackwood has taken ill while visiting there. Mr. Winters has requested you specifically as I'm needed at the mining camp." Cold dread washed over Nell. Agatha ill at Clay's house. It made no sense. Agatha would never willingly enter the lion's den, unless it was a trap. "Of course, doctor. I'll go at once." Morrison handed her a medical bag. "Take my spare. I've already included the laudanum and morphine Mrs. Blackwood might require." The bag felt unusually heavy. As Nell took it, something shifted inside, something that clinked metallically, unlike any medical instrument. "Thank you, doctor. I'll report back once I've assessed Mrs. Blackwood's condition." Outside, Nell ducked into an alley and opened the bag. Nestled among the expected medical supplies was a revolver loaded and ready. Beneath it lay a note in Thorne's handwriting. "Mother never visits Clay. This is their move. Be ready to make yours. I'll be watching the back garden. M." Shahem. Nell's hand closed around the revolver. The weight of it, the cold metal against her palm, brought back memories of the war, of learning to shoot, when the field hospital came under Confederate attack, of the young doctor who had insisted all his nurses know how to defend themselves and their patients. She had hoped never to hold such a weapon again, had prayed her war was over. But it seemed Thornridge had other plans. Concealing the gun beneath her shawl, Nell started up the hill toward the Winters mansion. Each step carried her closer to the home that had been her prison, to the man who had nearly destroyed her, to what might be her final confrontation with Clay Winters. The Winters house stood like a fortress on the highest point of Thornridge, its windows gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Nell approached from the front, maintaining Catherine Wells's prim, efficient demeanor, despite the terror coiling in her stomach. A maid answered her knock, not Mary, who had witnessed Nell's kindness to Mrs. Santiago, but a new girl Nell didn't recognize. "I'm Nurse Wells," she explained. "Dr. Morrison sent me to attend to Mrs. Blackwood." The maid nodded, stepping aside. "They're in the drawing room, ma'am." They. The word confirmed Nell's suspicions. This was no medical emergency. She followed the familiar hallway, each step echoing against hardwood floors she had once polished to Clay's exacting standards. The drawing room door stood partially open. Inside, voices murmured, male voices. Nell adjusted her spectacles, ensured her wig was secure, and knocked once before entering. The scene that greeted her might have been a casual social gathering, if not for the tension vibrating in the air. Clay Winters sat in his customary armchair by the fireplace, tumbler of whiskey in hand. Thomas lounged against the mantel, smirking slightly. Judge Mason occupied the settee, his silver beard neatly trimmed, his eyes cold as January frost. No sign of Agatha Blackwood. Ah, the mysterious Nurse Wells. Clay's voice that had once commanded her every moment, washed over Nell like ice water. "Thank you for coming so promptly." Nell maintained her disguise, keeping her gaze slightly lowered, her posture modest. "I understand Mrs. Blackwood requires medical attention." Thomas's laugh held no humor. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Agatha is in perfect health, attending a church function, I believe." "I don't understand." Nell clutched her medical bag tighter, feeling the reassuring weight of the revolver within. "Dr. Morrison said..." "Doctor..." Morrison said what he was instructed to say. Clay interrupted, rising from his chair. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, broad-shouldered, handsome, in the conventional way that had once fooled her into believing his exterior reflected his character. "We needed to speak with you privately, Mrs. Wells, or should I say, Eleanor." The name hung in the air between them, a death sentence pronounced. Nell could have continued the charade, protested ignorance, maintained her fictional identity. But something in Clay's confident smirk and Thomas's predatory gaze told her the game was already lost. Slowly, deliberately, she removed the spectacles, raised her chin to meet Clay's eyes directly. "Hello, Clay." His face twisted with triumph and fury. "My wayward wife returned from the dead. Did you really think you could hide from me in my own town? That I wouldn't recognize what belongs to me, no matter how you disguised it?" "I never belonged to you," Nell replied, her voice steadier than she had thought possible. "Not in any way that matters." Clay circled her slowly like a wolf sizing up wounded prey. "You embarrassed me, Eleanor. Made me the subject of gossip and speculation. Do you know what that cost? The business opportunities lost because men questioned whether I could control my own household. Is that all I was to you? A possession to be controlled? What else would you be? Clay seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. A wife exists to enhance her husband's position, to provide comfort and heirs. You failed at both. The casual cruelty of his assessment, reducing 6 years of her life to a contractual obligation unfulfilled, should have hurt. Instead, it strengthened Nell's resolve. This man, this monster in gentleman's clothing, had never seen her. Had never known the woman who had nursed broken soldiers, who had survived the wilderness, who had found purpose in helping others escape men like him. Where is she, Eleanor? Clay demanded, his tone hardening. Rebecca, did she send you back to taunt me? Rebecca, Clay's first wife, who had fled up the mountain with a map and a silver ring, who had vanished after reaching Sacramento. Rebecca is gone, Nell said simply, beyond your reach. Liar, Clay's hand struck her cheek, the familiar pain blossoming across her face. Thomas tracked her to California. She was there planning to testify about the abuses she suffered to ruin everything we've built. Then she disappeared again. Understanding dawned. Rebecca hadn't just fled, she had been gathering evidence, building a case against Clay and his allies. And they had found her before she could act. Did you kill her too? Nell asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Clay's expression shifted subtly, not guilt, but something like annoyance at an inconvenient fact. Rebecca made her choice, as did Catherine Mason before her, as did you when you ran to the mountain man. Judge Mason stirred at the mention of his deceased wife. Enough discussion, Clay. We need to know what she knows about Blackwood's operation, about the network. The Moonlight Road, Thomas supplied, watching Nell's reaction closely. We know parts of it enough to disrupt several escape attempts, but the central hub has eluded us. Is it Thorne's cabin, or somewhere deeper in the mountains? Nell remained silent, mind racing. They knew about Thorne, about the road, but not about Haven, not about Agatha's involvement, not about Porter's forced betrayal. Clay gripped her arm, fingers digging into flesh with bruising force. Answer him, Eleanor. Perhaps I'll be merciful if you cooperate. As merciful as you were to Mrs. Santiago, Nell countered, anger overtaking fear. Or to the miners who dared ask for safer conditions, or to the women who disappear from this town with suspicious regularity. Thomas stepped forward, his expression calculating. She knows too much, Clay, has been asking too many questions around town. The damage is already done. What damage? Clay scoffed. She's my wife, returned after a period of mental instability. Who would question that narrative once she's properly subdued? The implication sent ice through Nell's veins. Not death, at least not immediately. Clay intended to reclaim her, to break her will entirely, to make an example of her for any other woman who might consider escape. Judge Mason rose, straightening his waistcoat. I'll leave this domestic matter to you, Clay. Just ensure she can't communicate with outsiders. If Blackwood's network is exposed. It won't be Danny, Clay assured him. Eleanor will be closely monitored. Perhaps a prolonged rest at home is in order. Doctor, Morrison can provide suitable medications to calm her nerves. As the men discussed her fate as if she weren't present, Nell's hand slipped into her medical bag, fingers closing around the revolver's grip. One shot, she could end Clay's tyranny with a single bullet. But Thomas and the judge would continue the system of oppression that had claimed so many lives. No, justice required more than Clay's death. It required exposure, accountability, the destruction of the entire corrupt network. Porter's journal, the miners' records, evidence that could bring down not just Clay, but all of Thornridge's powerful men. I'll cooperate, Nell said, suddenly interrupting their planning. I'll tell you everything I know about the Moonlight Road, about Thorne, about the women who've escaped. Clay's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Why the sudden change of heart? Because I'm tired of running, tired of living in fear. Nell allowed her shoulders to slump, portraying defeat. You've won, Clay. You always do. Thomas didn't appear convinced. It's a trick. She's stalling. Stalling for what? Nell challenged. I'm alone here. Thorne is miles away in the mountains. What could I possibly be waiting for? Clay studied her arrogance, gradually replacing caution. This was the Clay she remembered, quick to believe in his own dominance, eager to accept submission from those he considered inferior. Very wise, Eleanor, he said, his tone softening to the patronizing cadence he used when pleased. I knew you'd eventually see reason. We can put this unfortunate episode behind us, return to our life together. I need to use the powder room first, Nell said, adding a slight tremor to her voice. The journey up the hill. I'm not feeling well. Clay gestured magnanimously. Of course, Thomas will escort you. Don't try anything foolish, Eleanor. The doors and windows are secured. Thomas took her arm, his grip painfully tight as he guided her to the hallway. I don't know what game you're playing, he hissed in her ear. But Clay may be willing to forgive. I am not. I'm not playing any game, Nell insisted, keeping her gaze downcast. I know when I'm defeated. The powder room was exactly as she remembered, small, elegant, with a window that overlooked the back garden. The same garden where Thorne waited, according to his note. 3 minutes, Thomas said, releasing her arm. Then I'm coming in regardless of your state. The moment the door closed, Nell moved to the window. It was latched, but not barred. Clay's arrogance extended to believing no one would dare enter or exit his home without permission. Unlatching the window as quietly as possible, Nell pushed it open and leaned out. The garden below lay in evening shadow, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Thorne, she whispered urgently. Are you there? For a heartbeat, nothing. Then a movement near the old oak tree, a figure detaching from the shadows approaching the house with silent grace. Thorne stood below, his face upturned, concern evident even in the dim light. They know, Nell called softly. Thomas guessed my identity, but they don't know about Haven, about your mother. They suspect Porter is helping us, but don't know he's being coerced. Thorne nodded, absorbing the information. Can you get out? Not without being seen. But listen, Porter keeps a journal of the missing women. Dates, details, and the miners have records of accidents at the mine. Together, they're evidence of everything Clay and the others have done. Where are these records? Porter's journal is hidden in the church. The miners' records, I'm not sure. Peters might know. A sound from the hallway, footsteps approaching. Thomas growing impatient. I have to go, Nell whispered desperately. Get the evidence. Take it to the governor, to the newspapers. It's the only way to end this. I'm not leaving you here, Thorne growled, moving closer to the house. Not with him. You have to. For all the others. For the road. Nell swallowed hard, then added, I'll be all right. I survived him before. I can do it again. The doorknob turned, out of time. Go, Nell urged, then closed the window just as Thomas entered. His suspicious gaze darted from Nell to the window and back. What are you doing? Getting some air, she replied, moving away from the window with deliberate casualness. It was stuffy in here. Thomas crossed to the window, throwing it open and leaning out to scan the garden. Seeing nothing, Thorne having melted back into the shadows, he turned back to Nell, suspicion still evident, but without confirmation. Clay's waiting, he said, simply gripping her arm once more to lead her back to the drawing room. Clay had poured himself another whiskey, his posture relaxed now that he believed victory secured. Feeling better, my dear, good. Now tell us about this Moonlight Road. Where does it lead? Who maintains it? Nell seated herself on the edge of a chair, mind racing for information she could share that wouldn't endanger the network. It's a series of safe houses, she began carefully, for women escaping difficult situations. Some head west to California, others east to Chicago or New York. And Thorne Matthew Blackwood. What's his role? He finds them in the mountains, guides them to safety. Nell kept her answers vague, truthful, but incomplete. That's all I know. I was only with him briefly before continuing on my own. Clay's eyes narrowed. Yet you returned to Thornridge. Why? I wept out of money, Nell improvised. Needed work. Thornridge seemed safer than continuing alone through the wilderness. And you thought I wouldn't recognize my own wife? Clay laughed incredulously. Your arrogance is astounding, Eleanor. Not arrogance, desperation. Nell met his gaze steadily. You never really looked at me, Clay. Never saw beyond the possession, the ornament. Why would you recognize someone you never truly saw? The truth of her words struck home. She could see it in the momentary confusion that crossed his face, quickly replaced by anger. Enough philosophizing, he snapped. Thomas, send for Dr. Morrison. Eleanor needs sedation before we announce her return. A nervous breakdown, I think. followed by a long convalescence under close supervision. "You can't keep me prisoner forever," Nell said quietly. "People will ask questions." Will they? The same people who never questioned Rebecca's fever, or Catherine Mason's consumption, or Margaret Mason's tragic decline. Clay's smile was cold. "Thornridge understands discretion, Eleanor. No one will interfere in a husband's management of his wife's health." As Thomas moved to the door to summon a servant, a commotion erupted outside, shouting then a gunshot. Clay was on his feet, instantly reaching for the desk drawer where Nell knew he kept a pistol. The drawing room door burst open. Sheriff Miller stood there, breathing heavily, hat askew. "Clay! The church, it's burning!" Clay froze pistol halfway from the drawer. "What? How? Don't know, but it's spreading fast. Could take half the town if we don't contain it." Miller's gaze landed on Nell, momentary confusion crossing his features before urgency reasserted itself. "We need every man at the bucket line. Now." Through the open door, Nell could see orange flames reflected on the clouds above town, hear the distant clanging of the fire bell. The church where Porter's journal was hidden, where evidence that could expose Clay's crimes might be reduced to ash. Or was that the point? Clay hesitated, clearly torn between securing his recaptured wife and maintaining his public role as town leader. "Go," Thomas urged. "I'll watch her. Can't have people saying you weren't there in the town's moment of need." With a reluctant nod, Clay tucked the pistol into his waistband and followed the sheriff, issuing orders as he went. Thomas closed the door behind them, turning to Nell with a smile that chilled her blood. "Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Almost as if someone wanted to create a distraction." "I don't know what you're talking about," Nell said, though her heart raced with hope. "Thorn, it had to be." "No." Thomas moved closer, circling her chair like a predator. "I think you do. I think you've been playing us from the moment you returned to Thornridge. The question is, why?" Nell remained silent, mind working furiously. Thomas was dangerous, more perceptive than Clay, more calculating. If she could keep him talking, keep him focused on her, rather than whatever Thorn might be doing elsewhere in town. "It doesn't matter," Thomas continued, when she didn't respond. "Whatever you and the mountain man are planning, it ends tonight. Clay may want you alive, broken to his will again, but I've always thought you were more trouble than you're worth." His hand moved to his jacket, withdrawing a small knife, the same blade he'd used to carve patterns into Santiago's flesh, before executing him if the miner's whispers were to be believed. "Clay will be occupied for hours with the fire," Thomas said conversationally, examining the knife's edge. "Plenty of time for his poor, mentally unstable wife to take her own life in a fit of despair. So tragic. So final." Fear and determination warred within Nell. The medical bag with Thorn's revolver sat just out of reach. Thomas stood between her and the door. The window offered no escape from the third-floor drawing room. She was trapped. "You won't get away with it," she said, playing for time. "Clay will know it wasn't suicide." Thomas laughed. "Clay sees what he wants to see. Just as he never noticed my visits to Rebecca's bed before she fled. Just as he never questioned why Catherine Mason always smiled so warmly when we met at church functions." The casual admission of adultery, of betraying his own brother, struck Nell as somehow worse than his threats of violence. This man violated every bond, every trust for his own gratification. "You're a monster," she whispered. "I'm a realist," Thomas corrected, moving closer. "I take what I want." Clay pretends the taking is justified by marriage certificates and social conventions. The judge hides behind legal opinions and closed-door rulings. But the result is the same men like us always win, Eleanor. Always. As he raised the knife, a new sound penetrated the chaos, from town hoofbeats approaching the house, then voices in the foyer below. Thomas hesitated, head turning toward the door. That moment of distraction was all Nell needed. She lunged for the medical bag, fingers closing around the revolver's grip. In one fluid motion, she withdrew it, aimed, and fired. The shot echoed in the confined space of the drawing room. Thomas staggered backward, disbelief etched on his features as crimson bloomed across his chest. The knife clattered to the floor. "You," he gasped, reaching toward her with bloodied fingers. "I survived the war," Nell said steadily, keeping the revolver trained on him as he collapsed to his knees. "I survived, Clay. I survived the mountain. Did you really think I wouldn't survive you too?" The drawing room door burst open. Thorne stood there, his own weapon drawn, Agatha Blackwood behind him. Their eyes took in the scene, Thomas bleeding on the oriental carpet, Nell standing over him, revolver still raised. "Nell!" Thorne breathed relief and concern mingling in his voice. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, the revolver finally lowering as exhaustion swept through her. "The church? A distraction," Agatha confirmed, stepping into the room with remarkable composure for a woman her age in the midst of chaos. "Controlled, contained. No one will be hurt, but it gave us time to retrieve Porter's journal and the miner's records." "You have them?" "The evidence." Thorne nodded, moving to Nell's side, carefully taking the revolver from her trembling hand. "Everything. Porter confessed his forced betrayal to the entire town council when the fire broke out. The miners presented their records of accidents. It's over, Nell." "Not quite," came a voice from the doorway. Clay stood there, face contorted with fury, his own pistol aimed directly at Thorne. "Step away from my wife," he commanded. "Now." Thorne didn't move. "She's not yours anymore, Clay. She never really was." "She's my wife," Clay roared, his composure finally cracking. "Mine, everything I've built, everything I am requires order. Requires respect. If a man can't control his own household, then perhaps he shouldn't have one." Agatha interrupted, her voice like steel. "Your empire is falling, Clayton Winters. Even now, Governor Hauser's representative is reading Porter's journal, reviewing the miners' records. The telegraph lines to Helena are busy with reports of mass graves discovered in the abandoned North Shaft graves containing women who supposedly died of fever or fled with traveling salesmen." Clay's face paled, but his pistol remained steady. "Lies. All lies. No court will take the word of miners and whores over mine." "Not just their word," Nell said quietly. "Rebecca's too." Clay's eyes widened. "Rebecca is dead." "No." Thorne's voice held grim satisfaction. "She reached on San Francisco, changed her name, built a new life, and wrote down everything you did to her, everything she witnessed in Thornridge. Her testimony arrived by special courier this morning, addressed to the territorial governor, with copies to newspapers in Helena, San Francisco, and Chicago." "Impossible," Clay whispered, but doubt had crept into his voice. "I found her, Clay," Thorne continued. "Not Thomas, me. She's been working with the Moonlight Road from the beginning, helping other women escape men like you." Clay's hand wavered, the pistol drooping slightly as the full implications of his situation penetrated his disbelief. "You're lying, all of you. This is some trick." The report of a gun cut off his words. Clay surveyed, a look of profound surprise crossing his features as he looked down at the spreading stain on his shirt. Behind him stood Porter, a small revolver clutched in shaking hands. "For Alice," the minister said simply, "and for all the others." Clay crumpled to the floor, the pistol falling from his grasp. His eyes found Nell's in his final moments, confusion rather than malice in their depths. "I gave you everything," he whispered. "No, Clay," Nell replied gently. "You took everything. There's a difference, Wayville." His eyes glazed, fixed on something none of them could see. Clayton Winters, master of Thornridge, was gone. Silence descended on the drawing room, broken only by Thomas's labored breathing as he clutched his wound. Agatha moved to Porter, gently taking the revolver from his trembling hands. "It's done," she said quietly. "The road is safe." Nell turned to Thorne, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what had transpired. Without a word, he opened his arms, and she stepped into them, finding solace in his strength and the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "What happens now?" she asked, voice muffled against his coat. "Justice," he replied simply. "For Catherine, for Rebecca, for all of them." Outside the church, fire had been contained, its purpose served. Throughout Thornridge, lamps glowed in windows as townsfolk gathered, sharing news of revelations too shocking to be processed alone. The miners stood watch at the main house, ensuring none of Clay's allies could flee before the governor's men arrived. And high on the mountain, Haven waited, a sanctuary for those who would still need it, a beginning for those ready to build something new from the ashes of the old. "Take me home," Nell whispered, looking up at Thorne. "To the lighthouse." His scarred face softened, his eyes reflecting something she had begun to recognize as hope. "Always," he promised, "for as long as you want." Together they stepped out into the night, leaving behind the house that had been Nell's prison. Above them, stars glittered like sentinels witnessing their slow walk toward freedom, toward a future where whispers on the mountain would speak not of escape, but of return, of healing, of home. The moonlight road had served its purpose. Now perhaps they could build a path that led not away from danger, but towards something worth protecting. A path lit not by moonlight but by dawn.